Hello and welcome. This is Alexander Hamilton Live, and I am Alexander. Today we are in the assembly room of the Pennsylvania State House located in Philadelphia. You may be more familiar with the names of Signers Hall, of Independence Hall. More specifically, I am located in the AltSpace metaverse during one of the last days that we can enjoy such a space, which was created for educating today's youth. We're going to be offering our play, The Debate for Independence, coming up shortly on the 9th at 9 p.m. Eastern or Philadelphia time. I'd like to welcome our guests that we have in today. My name is Alexander Hamilton, and I'm here for your pleasure. If you have any questions or topics that you would like to discuss, please do not hesitate to let me know. I love to talk, and I can talk on forever. All I simply would love to do is to follow your interest. And where are you from? Hello, I was about to recant a story about the very first battle in the Revolutionary War, which actually happened in New York. Would you care to hear such a tale? For when I arrived into New York in 1773, I was about to enter into college, and I fell in with the Sons of Liberty there, who operate out of Montaigne's Tavern. And Alexander MacDougall and Isaac Sears are some of the main characters who I took on great friendships with. They wanted me to understand New York's history with the British government, and more specifically with the Redcoats at this time. The barracks for the Redcoats, for the regulars, as we call them, was about 40-second walk away from the main tavern, Montaigne's Tavern, to which we operated on. This is around the Common, or which is now City Hall Park in New York City, and Montaigne's Tavern is right there on Broadway. They related the story, which actually I would like to now relate to you. The account that I'm going to give to you is a reading from the New York Gazette of January 31st, 1770. But to set the stage, I want to go back all the way to 1765, when all the problems began with the initiation of the stamp tax. But one moment, please. Hey, Google, stop. Sorry about that. Way back in 1765, with the Stamp Act, it placed a tax to which the gentlemen here and 3% of the population did not agree with. We created a rallying cry around this tax because our rights as English citizens were not allowed because we did not have representation in Parliament. In New York City, a grand liberty pole was placed in the Common right outside the barracks for the soldiers. This was now a center for where we would gather to talk about the Stamp Act, of course, to the gruntles of the soldiers who were there. Now, the soldiers in New York were already quite disgruntled with being there in New York, for we were the only colony that did not honor the Quartering Act that was issued previously, demanding that the colonies pay for the quartering of the soldiers. New York simply said no, and the British soldiers stationed in New York had one of the hardest stations because they were basically sleeping in stables as well as whatever barracks that they could make do with. But overcrowding was a severe problem. And so after our Liberty Pole was set up, the British regulars basically thought it nice one night to simply chop it down. Basically in anger to our great cause of liberty. This was the time when one of the members in Parliament by the name of Mr. Barr, B-A-R-R-E, declared that the people in America are the sons of liberty, for we are the ones who basically have carved out our own lives here in the wilderness. There are a few others that deserve liberty more than us because we have sacrificed so hard to earn it. But with the Liberty Pole, mind you, this pole is about 60 feet tall, about 12 feet below ground and 48 feet above. So to create such a thing is quite an endeavor. And when we put in the second one, just the same as the first, we actually had a grand festival at the time. There was much merrymaking going on. And we did the same thing. And of course, the British regulars, as the story goes, chopped it down again. The third time we put one up, we put metal bars around it, which then inhibited the regulars from chopping it down. So they then, being the British Army, used gunpowder, blew it up, and then took some of the pieces, brought it into Montaigne's Tavern, threw it down to the ground, beat up one of the bar boys there, and basically created great havoc. At this point, we went to the legislature and to the mayor's office to basically see what can be done. And there was a law made in New York City stating that no soldiers, regulars, should be out at night unless they're being escorted by an officer, because they are not our police. We don't have such a public service yet as a police force, so there's really no good for them being out and about at night as problems are happening. Well, as it be, one night, some of the soldiers are out and about, and the Sons of Liberty escort him, the two of them, to the mayor's house. At this point, there are two barracks in New York City, and some of the soldiers from the southern barracks proclaimed to their officer what was happening, and then those British regulars, went to go and free their fellow soldiers from the mayor's house. And here is where I will start to recount word by word this source from 1770 in the New York Gazette. The commander of the soldiers atop the hill, realizing the situation that the colonists were in, and probably thinking he now had a large enough force to return to the mayor's house and free the two soldiers being detained, gave the command, "Soldiers, draw your bayonets and cut your way through them." The colonists on the front line were forced to defend themselves, all of them unarmed. Those few that had sticks maintained their ground in the narrow passage in which they stood and defended their defenseless fellow citizens against the furious and unmanly attacks of armed soldiers, until one of them, in a stroke made at one of the assailants, lost his stick, which obliged the former to retreat. The soldiers pursued him down the main street until one of them made a stroke with a cutlass at Mr. Francis Field, who was standing in an inoffensive posture in the doorway at the corner, and cut him on the right cheek. This party that came down the main street cut a tea-water man driving his cart. In short, they madly attacked every person that they could reach. Besides cutting a sailor's head and finger, they stabbed another with a bayonet so badly that his life was thought in danger. Two of them followed a boy going for sugar into Mr. Ellsworth's house. One of them cut him on the head with a cutlass, and the other made a lunge with a bayonet at the woman in the entry. Captain Richardson was violently attacked by two of the soldiers with swords and expected to have been cut to pieces. but was so fortunate as to defend himself with a stick for a considerable time, till a halberd was placed into his hands, with which he could have killed several of them, but he made no other use of him than to defend himself and his naked fellow citizens. Such was the Battle of Golden Hill in January of 1770, about 2 months prior to the Boston Massacre, as Paul Revere has so named it. Now, New York is a very interesting place at the time. 16 different languages are spoken there. Do you have any questions by chance?
Is there any bread in the United States back then?
Any bread? Yes, absolutely. Oh, yes, bread. We've been cooking bread for quite a long time. It's an interesting story. Do you happen to know about clam chowder? Have you ever heard of that food, that soup? There's an interesting history to it, actually. For in the 18th century, many people were protein deficient, and getting protein was quite difficult. But if you were in Manhattan, it was easy just to walk down to the shore at low tide and pick up clams. Now, clams, of course, as you so rightly stated, it's quite disgusting, actually. So you need to cook it in something that makes it palatable. They found that milk does the trick, and of course, add in some vegetables and seasoning and whatnot. So this is clam chowder as we all know it. But at the very beginning of the Revolutionary War, when I was manning the cannons around the Common, which is present-day City Hall, and the General George Washington, was losing the battles in Brooklyn and forced to retreat to Manhattan, and then up north, me taking the rear guard, after that time, we lost New York for the entirety of the war. It was occupied by the British soldiers, who quickly, there were 30,000 of them or so, quickly killed all of the dairy cows and ate them. They needed the protein themselves. So this left the poor New Yorkers who would venture down to the sea line to gather the clams with nothing to cook it in, for there is no more milk. Hence, they needed a solution, and they found tomatoes grow very well in the city limits. And so they created what you now refer to as Manhattan clam chowder, where tomatoes take our substitute for the milk.
Questions?
Hello. Is there anything that you would like to know about? My name is Alexander Hamilton, and I love to talk about history, government, law, finance. Is always an internal drive of mine for the possibilities of the people and the human spirit. You might have noticed we are hosting a play in 3 days if you are so interested. So the event is coming up on the 9th, which I believe is this Thursday. Hello and welcome. Welcome to Independence Hall. My name is Alexander Hamilton, and if
West.
uh, the credit necessary for President Jefferson to purchase Louisiana was only created by my efforts. And while I was establishing the credit of the United States and the mechanisms to which I so brilliantly did, Mr. Jefferson fought me tooth and nail throughout the entire endeavor. And then, of course, only goes on to utilize that to his own benefit. So good for him. But it was really quite interesting that when I tried to establish a national bank, what you now refer to as your Federal Reserve, again, Representative Jefferson, Secretary of State Jefferson, I should say, he fought it tooth and nail, saying that there is no place in the Constitution where it gives the power to the federal government to create a bank. For in this room, the delegates met in order to change the former form of government, the Articles of Confederation, and to take some power from the states as they list it on the 4 pages of the Constitution written on the wall. If it's not written on those 4 pieces of paper, the federal government does not have the authority to do it. Everyone is still sovereign to their states completely, but that is the power of the federal government. And I pointed out in the Constitution, it does say that the federal government can do whatever is necessary and proper for it to fulfill its function. And I have to tell you, as the Secretary of the Treasury, that all the money that's coming in from the tax revenues collected by my revenue cutter fleet or enforced by my revenue cutter fleet is very successful. And then we have to pay the bondholders which exist in, of course, United States, but primarily the ones I have to pay first are in Europe. And so all this comings and goings of money, yes, we need a bank. That is what they can do. And then, of course, they can leverage that money by loaning it out, which is only a benefit. So again, he fought me tooth and nail, but I would like to point out to Mr. Jefferson, future President Jefferson, where does it say in the Constitution that the president has the right to buy land, to be a real estate broker? It does not. But the most interesting part is, though Thomas Jefferson and I were at complete odds in point of opinion about how this great country should thrive, we respected each other so much that even today at his house, they maintain the original positions of the busts of myself and Mr. Jefferson in his main foyer, standing in opposition to each other. For as he was so often quoted to guests coming to Monticello, he would say that we stood in opposition throughout our lives and should continue to stand in opposition here at his beloved Monticello. Well, maybe he's very grateful because I'm the one that got him elected president. In the election of 1800, My party, the Federalist Party, was in control of the presidency. It was John Adams, but John Adams and I had a falling out, and we really took our falling out into the newspapers and called each other really quite disturbing things, but maybe even too racy for your 21st century ears. Nonetheless, um, the winner of the election was a tie between Thomas Jefferson and his running mate, who everyone knew was his running mate, going to be vice president, Mr. Aaron Burr. But when Mr. Burr realized that he had a legal right to be president, the equal to Thomas Jefferson, he thought how best to play his power. Instead of simply acquiescing to his fellow Democratic Republican and say, yes, of course, Mr. Jefferson, we all know that I am running on your ticket with you and you are president. He, Aaron Burr, campaigned for office. The very first politician to campaign for office, for federal office in America. Campaigning was not done in the 18th century. If you have someone ramping about town saying, give me the power, I will do it, I will do a very good job, just give me the power. And of course, you do not want to give that person the power. We want to give the power to the most virtuous amongst us who will act not within their benefit, but for the benefit of the community. And so, where was I going on this? Would you have a question, sir? So I was talking about the election of 1800 and how I got Thomas Jefferson elected. With Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson tied, the vote went to the House of Representatives, and their tally also came up a tie. It came up a tie more than 30 times. To which at this point, I knew that I had to do something. And so I put my weight behind one of the candidates. But my choice was, should I choose Aaron Burr, who is my age, who is an orphan just like myself, who went into the military during the war and served as an officer and served in battle, who came to New York just the same as me in 1782 and became a lawyer, who I actually tried with as co-counsel on the very first murder trial in the United States in New York, and riding the circuit together. I knew him so well. Do I choose this man or Thomas Jefferson, the man to which I completely disagree on every political subject? But because honor is more important, integrity rules the day, I put my weight behind Thomas Jefferson. And he wins the next vote. Now, of course, at this point, Aaron Burr, who is vice president now, and because he campaigned for the office, Thomas Jefferson wanted nothing to do with him at all. Mr. Burr spent most of the time in New York. He rarely even went to the Senate, and it really had to work around his schedule to get him for any tie votes in the Senate to come back. But nobody really wanted him to be there. Later on, Thomas Jefferson tried to get Aaron Burr convicted of treason while he was still president. It's really quite interesting. So, Aaron Burr, during President Jefferson's second term, Aaron Burr is no longer his vice president. But Aaron Burr went off to the Midwest into present-day Texas and tried to get the military to secede from the American states in order to create their own country. This was found out about, and he was arrested, and he was tried for treason, to which Thomas Jefferson, having this animosity towards Burr for what he did with him at the election of 1800, went above and beyond what a president should do President Jefferson's openly said in the papers, this man who has been charged of treason is guilty. You cannot have the chief magistrate, the president of the country, proclaiming that a man is guilty who before the trial. The justice of the case was John Marshall, later to become Supreme Court Chief Justice John Marshall. And he told the president in no uncertain terms that he could not do and act in such a way, and that the fair trial must commence. And to which President Jefferson said, by all means, let us have a trial, and I will pick the jury. So this put President Jefferson at odds with Justice Marshall. Unfortunately, because of this, Mr. Burr was acquitted, just as he was acquitted during his final months as Vice President of the United States, still under Thomas Jefferson in 1804, when him and I appeared at a duel to which he shot and killed me because of some of the remarks that I supposedly said at a dinner party. Now, of course, I did do this great insult to Mr. Burr in 1800 by putting my weight towards Mr. Jefferson instead of the fellow New Yorker, Mr. Burr. But it was probably when Mr. Burr in 1804 tried to run for governor, and I did everything in my power to squash his ambitions. That was probably the last of the offenses that he could suffer from me. I did not really take it to heart how much the man had fallen from a high place to have an equal right to be President of the United States with Thomas Jefferson, and to fall to not even winning the governorship of New York. No wonder it drove him out west to try to create his own reality of a new land that he could be in charge of, not because he's elected, but just simply because he founded it. Well, such is the legacy of Aaron Burr. Do you happen to have any questions? Anything that you would also like to know? Well, it is 8 o'clock, so unless you have any questions that I can answer, we will end our talk for today. But I'd like to invite you back for the next 2 days that we have at our Independence Hall still with us. This is Alexander Hamilton coming to you on a video broadcast as well as an audio podcast from Alexander Hamilton Live.